Do you believe in ghosts? Not those cute cartoon ghosts that look like fluffy bed sheets, and not the dancing spirits you might see on a magic midsummer's night, but real ghosts. Big city ghosts. Foul, stinking, hostile troublemakers who don't have the decency to lie down when they're dead. Well, they're out there, and someone's got to stop them. It's a job for professionals. It's a job for the Ghostbusters.
Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection, and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan. This is
Dan Bergman.
And today, as a special guest, a friend of mine from Illinois,
Justin Pfister.
Justin is an old friend from the Navy, and he happened to be in town, and I thought it would be a good idea for him to join us on this episode, because we don't get to hang out a lot.
No, not at all.
We're enjoying our time together.
This is actually a terrible idea. I just want to let you know that now.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, awesome.
We've done worse.
Have you listened to the podcast?
I've got to be better than your wife. I've just got to...
My wife? She listens to this podcast, I'll have you know. In fact, I got chastised one time because she does listen to this podcast.
I can totally see that.
I implied that she didn't. She came up to me and said, I do, in fact, listen to your podcast.
Well played.
Okay. All right. So, first things first, let's go to listener feedback from our previous episode. And as usual, we have some listener feedback from Jeff Edwards. And he said...
The only reason I say I have to be better than your wife is because of the comment she made on my Facebook page the other day.
Oh?
Yes. About growing out of myself from back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Christy and Justin went to boot camp together.
Yes, we did.
Oh, wow.
She hated me.
I think she still does.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me.
As evidenced by the comment.
Yes.
Damn.
All right, so back to our listener feedback. Listener Jeff Edwards said on our Shrek 2 episode, another brilliant episode. Once again, the rabbit holes you went down were the best part of the podcast. So thank you, Jeff. We really, really appreciate your feedback. And again, ask all of our listeners to provide feedback on any of our episodes at the contact information we will provide, as usual, at the end of the episode.
Oh, Jeff really likes it when we fall down rabbit holes, don't we?
I think so. You know, and I think it was a lot of fun during the Alice in Wonderland episode because, you know, that's where rabbit holes started.
I was going to say, how ironic.
That's sort of when we started picking up the use of rabbit holes, although I think we've done it a couple of times.
I thought it was where you started running around going, eat me, eat me.
No, I didn't do that. And remember, this is a family-friendly podcast. All right, Justin's quite the distraction, so we're going to keep moving through. All right, so this is our random listener-selected episode. Again, to remind everyone, on episodes 5 and 0, we select a randomly generated pick from our list of movies that listeners have suggested to us. And this time we're doing Ghostbusters, the 1984 version. In the interest of full disclosure, Justin has not watched the movie.
Recently?
Recently. I could probably quote it. Some of my most, quotable lines come from this movie, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. So, in honor of our guest, in keeping with the format of the show, do you own this movie?
I do not.
So, I can't ask you how it got on your shelf.
No. You can ask me how I get on a certain hard drive, but not on my shelf.
I can neither confirm nor deny that Justin has a backup copy of a movie that he purchased legally through legal means on legal sites.
I did, actually. Actually, it was a so far roundabout way of preserving a VHS copy of the movie through a Radeon All-in-Wonder card on a desktop that I purchased shortly after I left the ship.
Wow.
Yes.
So, Dan, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in with how I got this movie on my shelf because VHS made me think of how I got it. Because this is one of the few movies that I actually owned on VHS. And when it came out on DVD, I had to get it. Now, I will admit I haven't made the jump to Blu-ray, but I've loved this movie since 1984 when it came out. And it caused some trouble in school because on the back of my name tag when we started the school year, I had written Ghostbusters and drawn some ghosts and things like that on there, and maybe a proton pack or two. And the young lady who was sitting next to me decided that would be entertaining to mock me for that. So, I got a little bit of crap for it, but I've loved this movie since it came out. And when I saw it on DVD, actually VHS, I had to have it. And then when I converted to DVD. So this was one of the few VHS cassettes that I actually owned.
Wow.
You're old.
Shut your pie hole, Dan.
I won't go into my old story about my first memory of this movie. May or may not involve sitting in the back of a station wagon at a certain drive-in with my parents and my two younger sisters. So.
Oh yeah, drive-ins. I miss drive-ins.
No.
Oh yeah.
All right, Dan, how'd this movie get on your shelf?
Well, this was kind of one of those late arrivals for me because I never owned it on VHS. This movie, I immediately fell in love with it. Being a young kid in 6th grade when it first came out, it just really captured my imagination. But this was also about the time when, before my parents actually would drop the money that a VHS recorder actually cost. They weren't willing to really drop the money for that, so we didn't have one. So I never got it on VHS. It wasn't until well into my adulthood that I actually got a VHS, but also by about that time, and I think it was when we met, is when DVD came out, and that's when I really started a movie collection. Oddly enough, it didn't end up on my shelf until close to the 2000s when they released a 2-disc special edition with the 1 and 2.
Yeah, I don't actually own 2, so...
Yeah, that was kind of a nostalgia move. Like, oh god, I love this movie. Why have I never bought it before? So that's pretty much how I ended up getting it.
Cool. So that's how it got on your
16.
shelf. Cool. Well, we've covered everything. Justin doesn't own it, so...
Sorry.
Well, I mean,
he's
technically...
a disappointment.
Well,
technically he does, and it's a legitimate legal backup copy.
What if I make a promise that I'll go buy the DVD immediately after the podcast?
Oh, well, then you're in.
Okay,
then we don't have to
awesome.
kick you off the show.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a probationary thing until you actually get it, but we give you some leeway.
Okay.
Gonna need physical evidence of that.
It's kind of like a temporary driver's license. This piece of paper will work, but it's not going to last forever.
Exactly. So, kind of going back to the beginning, I love this movie, and it kind of again indicates where this may or may not go on my shelf. But as I said earlier, it's quotable. I mean, that is...
Oh, absolutely. Are you the key master?
Yes. Dan, what do you think?
I just remember the quotable line that as a socially inept and repressed little kid, little, if you will, little mama's boy. The quote I loved, and it was amazing because my mom actually let me say it because she thought it was a funny movie too. It was just like, we came, we saw, we kicked his ass.
Yeah.
Because, back then that was taboo. You don't say things like that. But for this movie, she made an exception. So that's...
Well, it's funny because that's been so ingrained in our culture. I think there are a lot of people that never really think about where that was in a movie. It's just something that somebody would say.
Was that a derivative, though, of something earlier, or was that a Bill Murray original?
I'm not sure. I know that there were a lot of parts of this movie that were ad-libbed, but I don't know that one was, and I don't know that if he was drawing on something else as an inspiration.
Yeah, I want to say there was some historical reference. We came, we saw, we met the enemy, and he is us, or something like that, or he is ours, or I don't know.
Yeah, there's Veni Vidi Vici. We came, we saw, we conquered.
Eh? Okay. Yeah.
It's Latin. Maybe that's what he was doing. Maybe he was channeling his old Latin class.
I would say channeling his inner Julius Caesar, but...
Yeah. As they're giving it the 1984 New York spin on it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I love about this movie is New York is a character in this movie. As it is in many movies that are set in New York. Granted, there are a lot of movies that could be set anywhere, but in Ghostbusters, I don't know that it would work anywhere else but New York.
I would have to agree there because the city itself is so much not just a backdrop, but the character. It's the politics leaks in, the attitudes leak in, and just kind of the whole persona, I guess, would be the best way to say it. Just it bleeds into the characters, and it really kind of makes the movie. You couldn't have it anywhere else.
Well, yeah, I think part of it is the cynicism that is associated with New Yorkers that made this movie work. Because, one of the things I liked about this movie as a kid, it's like growing up, I read a lot of my brother's books, and a lot of them had ghost stories in them. And I just remember as a kid reading these things and being so terrified at night, just reading about these, poltergeist activity, and just like, you work yourself up and you're just like, what was that? And then to take a concept like that and make it into a punchline. And yeah, nowhere else could you do that but New York, where if somebody actually saw a ghost, it'd be like, meh, so what,
I think you and I, Dan, had talked about this before in a different conversation. It's possible that they might have been able to do something Ghostbuster-like in a city like New Orleans that has a rich history of being haunted, but it definitely wouldn't have been the same movie.
I was going to piggyback off that. It's kind of like Dan said, the cynicism of the New York attitude is kind of what made that movie funny. Because like you said, if it was in New Orleans, I mean, the number of people that believe in spectral occurrences would probably minimize the humor that would go into a movie like that.
Yeah, that was going to be my point exactly, is those people would take it way seriously than a New Yorker would. Because, again, the New Yorker would just shrug it off, whereas New Orleans, people would be like, oh, it's so-and-so, or it's, Mamazilla.
Mamazilla.
Hey, it's that voodoo man. But, yeah, and the other thing about this movie is it lets you know immediately that you're in New York with the iconic lions out front of the New York Public Library. And side note, Justin is from Illinois and has been to Chicago a number of times, and he could probably provide me with the information I'm asking, because I don't quite frankly remember the name of the place. And this is a weird, maybe not family-friendly story, but Christy and I were walking around Chicago with her parents and her brother and some friends, and we went to downtown, and we were down by Lake Michigan, and there's a museum, I think, that has lion statues out front.
Museum of Natural History, yeah. It's right across from Soldier Field.
No, we were farther away than that. It was up farther, like downtown, maybe not Lake Michigan, but
okay.
It was downtown Chicago proper. It was like a few blocks away from like the Ritz or something. It was by the Bean and I mean that whole neck of the woods, because we were walking around that area.
I know where you're talking
but,
about.
So we did selfies with the lion because apparently it's an iconic thing and you have to take selfies nowadays. And one of the things that I just happened to notice when I walked up the stairs and looked down at the rest of my family is that the lion was anatomically correct.
Oh, yes.
So it actually had two,
It had its twig and berries.
Yes. So it made me kind of chuckle when I rewatched this movie, and it made me wonder, are the lions at the New York Public Library anatomically correct also?
I really wish we would have done this like 2 years ago, because I was in New York and I would have looked.
I'm sure it's a Googleable thing.
I would have been the weird guy underneath the lion with my phone taking pictures for you.
I find it amusing, not that you would do that, but that you thought that you'd be the weird guy doing that.
Yeah.
It's New York we're talking about here.
Valid point.
Fair enough. Hey, it's one of those tourists again, eh? Sorry, I don't do a good New York accent. It sounds more like a poor man's
I always have to go
mafioso.
with the Ren and Stimpy log commercial. I'm walking here in order to get it started.
Yeah, you really got to get going with that.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm walking here is from the movie Taxi Driver. And it's also a line from
Miss Congeniality.
Well, it's in a lot of movies.
Yes.
But it is delivered by Bill Murray in Ghostbusters.
Oh.
When they're getting ready to go bust Gozer, I believe. It's like, hey, we're walking here. That is a standard New York line. Again, it gives that whole New York persona thing that we were talking about earlier.
The only thing missing is the I Love New York stickers on the back of the proton packs.
Was that a thing then? Was that a thing yet?
I'm pretty sure it was.
This is a little late, but I'm gonna say I'm gonna have to correct you on that. It wasn't Taxi Driver; it was Midnight Cowboy, and it was delivered by Dustin Hoffman.
Okay, no problem. All right, I thought it was in Taxi Driver. Damn it. Oh well.
No, Taxi. I think you're thinking of You Talking to Me.
Oh yeah, that's probably what it was. Yeah. You talking to me?
You talking to me?
Are you talking to me?
That was even creepier because that was in his own apartment and in front of his mirror. So
yes.
Bringing up these lines, though, it's funny that I don't immediately recall the moment in the film where Bill Murray says, "I'm walking here." But, they didn't feel the need to rehash a lot of old lines in this film. They really kind of stuck with their own.
And, again, most of those were situational, but like I'd said earlier, hey, this guy's a sailor, we'll take him downtown. That's, again, situational, but it's a thing, especially being in the Navy, as the three of us were, it's not something that didn't get used often.
No, and I think a lot of that attributes to Harold Ramis's creativity, because if you look at Ramis's body of work as far as those comedies go, Stripes, Meatballs, Ghostbusters, I mean, he was very original in his line construction, but you always kind of had that feeling of a New York attitude, no matter what, because Stripes, what kind of training, soldier? Army training, sir. And Meatballs, I can't think of any lines that I quote from that movie anymore. It's been so long.
The only thing I ever quote from Meatballs is the "it just doesn't matter" bit.
Yeah.
But that was more of a Bill Murrayism.
Yeah, and that was a comedy style, the self-aware style that Murray had. And I think him and Ramis worked well back and forth.
Yeah, until they didn't. We'll get to
but,
that.
Yeah, that's later. Much later.
That was actually a Groundhog Day. When I was doing the research for this movie,
right.
The rift in their relationship started during the filming of Groundhog Day.
Well, I think Bill Murray's rift with a lot of people started, in the late 80s, early 90s on stuff like that because, and your research may show it, better, but I think he became very disenchanted with his profession.
Maybe.
Because his real big return came in Lost in Translation before he became really popular again.
And that was more of a serious acting turn, which is something that we were going to discuss later, but I guess we're doing it now.
Sorry.
No worries. Dan?
Premature exposition. I'm sorry.
I know you and I had discussed this in a previous conversation. Actually, let me drop back for just a second and talk about Bill Murray, because one of the things that I have discussed with other people in conversation is that for the period that Justin was talking about, the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, Bill Murray played a lot of the same character. It was you're going to adjust to me, I'm not going to adjust to you. Do you get that same sense?
Yes and no. I mean, yeah, there's you could see that aspect in a lot of the movies. Let's put the example of his interactions with Dana Barrett, Sigourney Weaver's part. She was obviously above him. She was sophisticated, she was intelligent, whereas Venkman was kind of a bottom feeder. He was
like a game show host.
Yeah, used car salesman, whatever, But it seemed like at the end of the movie he didn't improve.
No.
He got the girl, but he didn't improve. She just sort of accepted him for, And I think, yeah, you're the one that really pointed that out and everything. So it's I guess in that vein, as far as his character, though, different characters doing the same thing, I should say.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously he's a fairly educated man in this movie. In Caddyshack, he's kind of a buffoon.
But he's a buffoon in this movie, too. And Justin is sitting next to me with his hands clasped in anticipation of saying something.
Not going on the tangent of Caddyshack, by far one of my favorite Bill Murray roles. So I got that going for me. But
Justin plays a lot of golf.
I do. I try. But kind of more to both of your points, going back to the Dana Barrett part, I think that was more of an underdog dynamic where we as individuals, whether male or female, we want to be as authentic as we can and still get the girl. And I think that was what the moral of the story there was. Even Underdog, Cinderella story. Sorry, man, I told us that I wasn't going to go off on Caddyshack, but
it's okay. We go down rabbit holes
on
this show.
So I mean, Bill Murray's character, Venkman charming Dana was kind of, I feel like it was along those lines. Not that he had to change and become something different, but that he could still achieve, kind of what he wanted and still be his authentic self.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you slightly because...
That's a first.
Again, in the movie, Dana Barrett says it, you're like a game show host.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The original line was supposed to be used car salesman, which implies something that I felt anyway, is that Venkman was never truly who he really was. He was just the guy that goofed off and did the things that he wanted to, which I guess is who he really is.
You felt like it was
it was a put on. He was never really genuine with anybody. It was like, I'm going to schmooze you to get what I want out of this. Like when he was sitting there with Jennifer Runyon, who for some reason I can always remember her name because she was in Charles in Charge. For those of you that don't know, Scott Baio was in a television series called Charles in Charge, where he was the nanny and Jennifer Runyon was his girlfriend. I don't know why I know that. I just do. It's stuck in my head. Anyway, when he was doing the parapsychology telepathy experiment, he was schmoozing her. He was trying to get what he wanted out of the relationship, out of the
encounter.
The encounter, exactly. He was doing the same thing with Dana Barrett.
No, absolutely. I agree
so,
there.
The only thing that Dana Barrett had going in her favor, or not, depending on whether or not she should be dating Venkman, is that he had time to wear her down, whereas it wasn't set up as a chance encounter between two people like it was with Jennifer Runyon. And that whole scene was there to set up that Venkman's a player. He's not there for the goodness of what they're doing. He's there like, oh, there's got to be something in it for me.
Although, the premise of that, I agree, doesn't change the message at the end, because, okay, first off, let's talk about the fact that we're watching a movie, willful suspension of disbelief. You identify with the character not based off the character attributes, but the situations that they're put in.
Okay.
So most people are going to glean over that, and your keen eye and ear for such charms in a situation like that would I totally agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But I'm saying superficially, on the surface, it's more of an underdog story, not depth. I mean, if we want to go Freudian on this, then yes, and absolutely go for it.
I shall call Sigmund.
It's call me Siggy.
I gotta say that the whole underdog aspect, it's like, well, I don't disagree with it entirely and everything, but I just gotta add the caveat that, this is a pure fantasy, because any of us would know that if you act as yourself with no adjustments, ain't no way you're getting a girl. Unless you find somebody entirely identical to you. I have never heard of or seen or read about anybody that didn't have to make some adjustments.
Well, but I think we talked about that in Shrek 2. That was one of the things that made that movie, give it a little bit of an emotional touch, was Shrek realized he had to change a little bit or accept himself for who he was.
But Fiona had to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So don't you think Dana accepted that, hey, not everybody's going to be as effete or educated as her, but he does have characteristics she likes?
Well, see, in this movie, okay, wait, let me go back to your Shrek point and everything. That's the thing. Shrek actually grew as a character.
Yes.
He came to be more accepting and less of an isolationist and everything. And I know this is going to sound terrible and everything, and I realize this is a comedy and this is lighthearted and it's not meant for this movie. But as an outside observer, just saying what I see, Venkman and actually none of the other characters actually grew in this movie. To me, they were the same people at the end that they were in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the exception of Dana Barrett, who just kind of said, okay,
let's give this a shot.
Let's give this a shot. And of course, in Ghostbusters 2, you see it didn't work out. So
right, until it
realism
worked
in there.
out again in the second one. Yeah. So as far as that goes, kind of veering off a little bit, this was actually Sigourney Weaver's first foray into comedy movies. From the research that I did beforehand, she had kind of always wanted to, because she did some comedic acting in her drama classes, but she'd never had an opportunity. So I gotta say, as a first effort in a comedic movie, I mean, she played it straight most of the time. I mean, she was, for all intents and purposes, the straight man in the story. She had a good sense of comedic timing, and I think she did it well.
Oh, way better than Dane Cook did in Waiting. Sorry.
Wow.
Tell us how you really feel, Justin.
Talk about the sniper shot that came from behind you.
That's a 50 cal Barrett right there. We're gonna. I didn't even know those were legal. Damn it. Anyway.
Top rope.
Well, at least it's not an unlicensed nuclear accelerator. That's good. You got that going for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, talk about another character in that movie. You gotta say that those proton accelerators are characters in and of themselves.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the noise they made. I mean, again, as I said, this movie really captured my imagination. As a kid, after I saw the movie, I was just so excited about it, and they really didn't make any toys just yet. So I basically had to make my own proton accelerator out of a flat that you get soup cans in.
Nice.
Was the main body of it,
well
and
played.
a bunch of other things. That was the main backpack, and a bunch of other little things. I think I put a pie pan in it to make the circle in the back, and I used a cardboard tube in the center of the aluminum wrap. That was the main thing. I found some old wires in the garage and everything and connected it to. And the only thing about it, though, and this is the thing that I'm kind of embarrassed to tell about it, but hey, full disclosure, I am who I am. I accidentally, using a paint pen, misspelled ghost.
Oh.
I forgot the H. And it was a paint pen, so I couldn't paint over it. I couldn't erase it, so it was G-O-S-T.
Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters!
So I thought, hey, I'll just put an E at the end. Now it's ghost.
Was it a silent E?
And, the funny thing is that, my friends were like, it says Ghosty Busters. but I
funny.
just, I tried to say it's cute. And people were like, no, it's not.
Well, it's funny now.
So, it's funny now, but it wasn't, my mom actually got pissed, because she was like, do you want people to think you're stupid?
Too late, Mom.
Yeah.
Yes, my friends have already let me know it's fine.
But the other thing I built was the trap, and it was a little small size shoebox, and I cut it so it had the little trap door at the top, and yeah, threw it in the room, and it had a little string attached to it. So when I pulled the string, it opened up, and I thought, it works,
Nice.
But
Tell me you had a cat at the time, and the cat would jump in the box, and that was your ghost.
my family had cats, but no, none of them were stupid enough to go jump in the box. So.
Damn it.
You put litter in there, and you teach them that this is...
Litter?
The
Put
light is
catnip in
green,
there.
the trap is clean.
Yeah, catnip or food or something. Yeah, I probably could have done that, but yeah.
And then my just saying the light is green, the trap is clean. Again, lines that I quote all the time for no reason whatsoever. And sometimes they don't even fit the situation. I'll just do it just because.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, well, it's... As a friend of mine once said, it's a gestalt multimedia conversation you have to just participate in.
Right.
And move from thing to thing. But I actually think that's pretty awesome. Misspelled Ghosty Busters included, actually. That's the kind of thing that I think is missing nowadays. Things are so marketed towards toys, and we really do have Star Wars to thank for that for the most part. Thanks, George. There are so many movies that have toy tie-ins, or like Happy Meal tie-ins, and Burger King tie-ins, and Wendy's, not so much, but you can get a toy with everything now. Don't get me wrong, I have a metric crap ton of Lego stuff in what I call my studio / man cave, and it's all mostly Star Wars related, but there's a lot of not having to imagine you being a Ghostbuster anymore. Because you could go buy a toy proton pack.
Oh, there's so much of that now, and it's all become, the toys are marketed probably around the same time as the movie now, and that blows my mind, because I agree with Dan, because Dan went way farther than I went. I just took an old backpack from school and took an old vacuum cleaner hose to make my proton pack, and I used my imagination for the rest of it at my dad's expense. Sorry, Dad. But yeah, I remember being a kid and just all the imagination I would put into characters that I saw on TV that you want to emulate, or you want to extend that fantasy to your childlike world. I remember tearing cushions off my mom's couch to put them on the floor so I could do a flying leap and jump, dive, roll, whatever. Because, Mom, I'm a stunt man. But I agree with you. There's not any of that imagination that goes into being a kid now because it's laid out there for you.
Yeah, for the kids, I think though the level of creativity and imagination has shifted into the adults who can afford to construct their own cosplay, which you do see some amazing home-built stuff, it's like, but yeah, it's unfortunate that the kids aren't the ones doing this with whatever boxes they can find or whatever, but I gotta say, it's not entirely dead. You just see it in adults who have a bigger budget and better materials.
Yeah, and try to get more realistic about it. And that brings up an interesting point. I mean, your setup wouldn't have won any awards at a cosplay competition, but you know what? It was yours, and it showed imagination. And again, kind of goes back to what we were talking about, is there's a lot of toy tie-ins to movies, and while you can play and imagine, and I know that some of my movie action figures when I was a kid crossed over with other movie action figures, and we just did things, and the Star Wars characters rode in Hot Wheels cars and all that kind of stuff. It seems like it's different because there's just so much more that you can get now.
How big were your Star Wars action figures?
I actually had the
cow.
little ones, and they would ride them like skates. They would put their little feet in the convertibles.
Oh, okay. I thought you were like jamming them in there. I was like,
No. But I did actually, and I don't know that my brother actually listens to the podcast all that often. But interesting side story, he and a friend of his had decided that they were going to go somewhere. I don't know where, but in order to bribe is such a harsh word to use, but in order to interest me in not divulging their absence from their stated location, I got a 12-inch Chewbacca and a 12-inch Han Solo and a laugh bag that was just a it was one of those old, like cotton bags, but it had a box in there, and you just push the button and it would start laughing. And it wasn't random laughs. It was the same laugh over and over and over again because it was the 80s and that's all we had.
That was all you could do, yeah.
But, so my mom actually wondered where I'd gotten the new larger action figures. And I said, I don't remember. And she said, yes, you do. So, yeah, my brother got in trouble for that, and I had to give those back. So, anyway, never let it be said that I wasn't an honest child, even though tempted as I may have been.
So your brother wasn't Paul Manafort?
He was not. Wow! Being all currenty and stuff. Look at you go.
I know.
But the other thing that you had said, Dan, that I kind of wanted to touch on was the iconic noise of the proton pack turning on. That's just like a lightsaber. It's the same sort of thing where you're like, once you hear that, you're like, oh, that's that. I know exactly what that is.
Oh,
and you can't miss it.
No.
Oh, and that was the thing. Again, back in the 80s, before we had the internet or YouTube or anything, the only place to hear that was if you had the movie on VHS, which I did not, or you went and saw it in the theater. And, as a kid trying to recreate the sound yourself, just... that was half the fun. And there were competitions at school who could make it sound better,
We also had competitions as to who could burp the alphabet better. So, there was a lot of that too. But, again, going back to this movie, this was also around the time that HBO and Cinemax and there were some smaller movie channels that never really made it anywhere because we had Spotlight when I was a kid. That was our movie channel. Oh
wow, you're totally forgetting the proto cable television services, Select TV and On TV. I don't know if you remember those.
I don't think we had those. You lived in L.A. I came from a small town in Oregon of 12,000.
Huh.
We didn't have stuff.
You're from a big city.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a service that when you got it, they came and installed a small special antenna on your roof, and it went directly into this box that you put on top of the television. And I don't know if you remember the little fork things that you stuck in the screws in the back of the TV and the selector switch.
Yeah, that's how you connected the Atari.
Yes.
Yeah, same exact thing. So yeah, you did that. You turned to channel 3, hit the switch, and now you've got a movie channel. You know, where you could see shortly after a theater release movies with no commercials. And of course, as a young kid too, you know, you had the midnight specials.
Oh, hey, Skinamax.
Yeah.
They don't call it Skinamax for a reason.
Check, please.
So we had cable TV when it was first introduced, and it wasn't straight into the television. There was a set-top box so that you could get past the 13 channels that the VHF tuner was restricted to.
Wait for it.
So, so we figured out that channel 20 was HBO and channel 19 was whatever it was. But if you jockeyed that thing just right and took a matchbook cover and shoved it in there, you could lock that thing in the middle position and decode HBO for sometimes up to like 3 hours, you know, before anything shifted. But and it would shift because somebody walked by and the vibration just caused the thing to move. You're like, oh, well, I guess we'll just have to listen to how this movie ends, or look at, you know, half of it with the little squiggly line up the middle.
That was always the part that killed me about that technology, is because, granted, you wouldn't have picture, but you would have full sound. There's no interrupted sound, but the picture was like all...
It was just split. It was
I can't
like
think of a family...
scrambled.
Yeah, it was just 90 degrees out of phase. They just shift the vertical hold, if you will, to the left or right, and it was just half a show.
Yeah, you guys are really just horribly reminding me of that day and age when, you know, you turn to the scrambled channel and it would be the only channel that you would tolerate in that skewed colors and scrambled, and it's
the purples and browns.
And the squiggly lines, but if you could make out the form, it's like, oh, there it is, you know, oh my god, I'm actually watching this.
I know what that is! I just finished health class.
That was, boy, talk about remnants of the 80s there, right there.
Kids today will never know, just saying.
No.
Just saying.
We could go one farther with going to the local grocery store to rent a VHS player, and it being the size of a Smith Corona typewriter and just about as heavy.
Oh, yeah.
And then waddling into the house carrying that thing with 2 videos that you get to keep for 24 hours. So quick.
Do you realize the confusion you just caused? Because everyone's like, the size of a Smith Corona. Like, it's a Smith Corona!
Valid point.
What's that?
Fair enough.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, kids, go to Google. Or... If you
listeners, if you're not sure what Justin's talking about, then Google Smith Corona and have a good time.
Or go to shopgoodwill.com, and they have plenty of them for sale for less than $12.
We actually have one in the house.
Not the one I'm talking about.
Maybe we do.
Seriously? The gray, with the ribbon and everything?
Have you looked on top of our DVD shelf?
I have not.
Yeah. On top of our shelves that we contain our DVDs on is an old antique typewriter.
Okay.
And an old Polaroid as well. So there. And when I say old Polaroid, I don't mean like the pop it up kind of one. I mean, this is the
pop it out,
turn the thing, and the little,
yeah.
You know, it's old. My wife likes iniitates.
The ones that take like X-ray slide style.
Yes,
yeah.
Those are the ones.
Crap! I just dated myself on that one too, because
they don't use
those.
Yeah,
those are all digital
we're all
too.
kind of old, and we know that. But
where's my cane?
But ironically, again, going back to Ghostbusters, this movie came out when we were all 10 to 14 years old, so this was right in the wheelhouse of capturing the imagination, giving Dan something to make and misspell things on, giving Justin something to play with the vacuum hose besides
cleaning
whatever else it was he was doing with the vacuum hose. And it was a great use of special effects in a comedy, because that wasn't something that you really saw a lot of either in the 80s. I mean, the special effects in this movie are pretty freaking impressive. Now, I will say that on the rewatch, when you see the terror dogs, Vince Clortho and Zool, when they run around in the street, you can totally make, like, okay, that's stop motion. It's not
stop motion overlay.
Yeah, it's not even remotely up to today's standards, but it still holds up. It's still pretty awesome.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And like you said, there's the end of that sentence. Special effects for the time. I mean, because if you go back on the rewatch, like you said, except for that part, the rest, the ghosts, Slimer, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, all of that stuff holds up pretty well.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not the CGI of now, but still it's pretty good given it was a big budget comedy, not sci-fi. So I would say, all in all, that was actually one of the best parts.
Yeah, it's definitely something we discussed in our very first podcast when we talked about Casablanca. You get that opening scene where everybody looks up and the plane is arriving at the airport, but you know, in the movie, it's obviously a cardboard cutout that somebody just went woo across the screen. But do I need to change that? No, absolutely not. That's what it was, man. I wouldn't change it for the world. And that's, like you said, the Terror Dogs, like you said, blue screen superimposed. Doesn't bother me.
Perfectly okay with it.
Not one bit.
So that was one of the things that I was wondering when I was actually watching the movie is I don't recall seeing this on VHS specifically. I know I owned it. I know I saw it on movie channels and that sort of thing. But going back to what Dan had mentioned, and I'm not sure if you listened to our Casablanca episode. Listeners, that's episode 1, our very first episode. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the technology of today and up conversion from standard definition to high definition. And in some instances, you actually lose some fidelity because you'll see it's not digitally remastered, so you'll see the blue outlines of boxes. Like on our the Fifth Element episode, there's a spot where you can see the blue box around the ship taking off. Mm-hmm. This movie doesn't really suffer from that, but I haven't seen it on Blu-ray, so I'm not sure if that holds up. Have you ever seen it on Blu-ray?
I have not.
Dan?
No, I haven't. Not a priority. For me, movies of that era who don't really require it. You know, this isn't The Matrix. This isn't Blade Runner. It doesn't have those sweeping views that really need me to have it in high definition. So I've got like almost no interest in seeing it in high def.
Yeah, neither do I.
Low def DVD is fine.
And even DVD is still higher def than VHS. Listeners, if you want to touch on whether or not this upscales well, let us know. Again, we'll give you the contact information at the end of the episode. So one of the other things that I had taken down in my notes, kind of moving past the special effects and that sort of thing, is, well, actually, no, staying on special effects. This is an excellent example of the matte paintings as well. That's a big movie making technique where they just paint what they want on the background and then shoot the other stuff in the foreground. It all lines up and everything. Because the apartment building that Dana Barrett lives in, Spook Central, if you will, is a legitimate apartment building, but it's nowhere near as tall as it is in the movie. They just used matte paintings, and you can kind of see that when they do the external setting shot when the sky starts to get dark and the lightning's coming up and stuff, and the clouds are filling out the sky. But it's again, it is, for a comedy, an incredibly good use of the special effects. And it doesn't go into it so much that it's just all effects for the comedy. It's special effects when the special effects are needed, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely, and I think that kind of lends to how well the cinematography of that movie was done as well. Because in today's day and age, you know, you get a bad shot or something doesn't play as well, they just kind of scrap the whole background, CGI over it. But in what you're talking about, you have to have the shot that you want of the actual building so that they can paint for it. So I mean, there was some real technique that was in Ghostbusters
absolutely.
as well. So it wasn't a slapstick, slap it together type shoot either.
You talked about the CGI thing, and the first thing I thought of was Henry Cavill has no mustache. Henry Cavill has no mustache.
My thought is that you're touching on a valid point as to why this movie was so great, because nowadays you can have that easy, like, okay, we'll just CGI over it, or we'll just clean it up afterwards in post-production, or we'll just do this. It's almost like movie making kind of got a little lazy. Whereas back then, it's like, okay, look, we've only got so much film, the budget, we're over budget on the film as it is. And when I'm talking about film, I'm talking about like, film for camera, I'm talking
actual
like,
real
we have
film.
to buy.
It's not a euphemism, kids.
We actually had to buy film for this movie, and we've only got so much, so we better get this shot right.
Yeah, exactly.
The first time,
exactly, or
at least at least in 2 or 3 times. We can't take too many takes, or we'll go over budget, type of thing. So that's why there was such a masterful technique utilized in making movies like this, and that's why it came out so well. Even though it's a comedy, that's something that was a little lighthearted that most people didn't take too seriously, but the movie makers obviously did.
Yeah, well, actually, for a good long time, this was the most money-making comedy in the history of film. It was the first one to break $200 million, and until Home Alone came out, it held the record for highest money-making comedy.
Hey, well deserved.
Absolutely. One of the other things about this movie that kind of dates it to the 80s is some of the magazines and the way things look, the hairstyles and that sort of thing. And I think you could make this movie anytime if you use the same plot and the same sort of thing. Again, you could probably change it. I mean, and I'm kind of sidewise referring, I guess, to the Ghostbusters 2016, which was a reboot of the franchise as opposed to an extension of. And I will say, without going into Ghostbusters 2016 too much on my end, I didn't care for the movie because the movie wasn't that good. And I think they relied too much on the special effects for gags. And I don't think that the script was that particularly good. Personally, I would have liked to have seen an extension of this universe moved forward and just populated with whoever they wanted to populate it with. I know there was the big backlash about recasting as all women. I don't care about that.
I was going to say, I didn't, I can't be as harsh as some of the critics for the 2016 version, because whenever I go into and I'm using air quotes, reboots, I personally look at it as, okay, this is in no way, shape, or form going to live up to what I have in my head for the original. And knowing that going in, it allows me to kind of take out the moments that I think are funny. I'll give credence to the moments that it did have. I thought they could have done more. I liked how they kind of flipped the dynamic where Kristen Wiig was kind of the straight-laced I don't believe. She did kind of an I don't believe fake feeling because she was trying to maintain her reputation as a scientist. But then they made Melissa McCarthy, who would have been the Harold Ramis character of Igan, made her kind of like the let's go do this character. So that moment in and of itself was kind of neat. But I think where they really kind of went wrong was the whole Kate McKinnon as the mad scientist of the technology. It was kind of jammed in there. It was like they wanted to give everybody an individual role. They kind of split Ray's character into Melissa McCarthy and Kate McKinnon without giving a full Harold Ramis style, I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
Yeah, without giving that counterbalance. They were both nerds,
right?
But just in different directions. They had it was like a Venn diagram, not a Venkman diagram. That's something else entirely. Where they had like a little bit on the sides where they didn't overlap. But they were basically, and that was the area they played in, but they were basically two aspects of the same person.
But actually, it just occurred to me just now in saying that they were more of the nerds and geeks of today than what the stereotype of the nerds and geeks back in the 80s were. Because, I don't
know about that because I was a nerd and a geek in the 80s. So
there was a clear definition between a nerd and a geek back then. A nerd was the guy with the pocket protector, who was in grade school carrying a briefcase, and you knew was probably going to do something that involved a salary way more than what I was going to earn.
Like make Microsoft.
Right, yeah, exactly. So I feel like they tried to modernize it too much, and in so much they lost the characters. That's how I kind of feel about it.
Okay. Dan?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say about that is that, yeah, the 2016 definitely did lack the organic feel that the 1984 had. It just seemed natural, I mean, I believe in one conversation you asked me is like, could you make Ghostbusters today? And my answer is, yeah, you could. As long as you don't try to force the time. Because, I mean, we like to say that Ghostbusters 1984 is a product of its time. It definitely harkens back. It takes us back to the 80s. But they did it because they weren't trying to be anything but themselves. They were just saying, this is the environment. We're not changing anything other than, okay, we're guys trying to hunt ghosts. Everything else was just there. New York was just there. Everybody who acted like New Yorkers, because that's how New Yorkers acted. They didn't change anything. They didn't force any vernacular. They didn't use any slang. It's just how it was. So when time passed, now that we're in 2018, we look back and say, yeah, that's a snapshot of the 80s. Because nobody tried to force it. Nobody tried to make an impression of it. And I think if you did that today, as long as you stayed with that this is 2018, I think you can make something pretty good. Maybe I'm not going to say just as good or just the same, but I'd say you'd be able. And the only, like, for me, the only difference would be it's like in the opening scene when they're in the library and they're trying to figure out what to do with the ghost of the librarian, and they say, well, "What do we do?" And then Igan looks at his calculator and he slaps it out of his hand. It's like only today it would probably be a smartphone instead of a calculator.
Yeah, and the computers would have blown up, not the card catalogs.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah, you get flashpots going off in the computers rather than
instead of
a
books,
fan
Kindles
blowing all the cards
off
everywhere.
The no.
You know, but to jump forward to what we were talking about to the 2016 reboot, like I said, that one felt forced. They were trying to do something, and they just pushed it too much, and it suffered a lot of things. I thought the writing was kind of poor. The editing, they really relied a lot on the special effects to the point where it's just like, you know, the special effects does not make the movie. It should be something else.
Right, it should be something to enhance the movie, not be the movie.
Yeah, and I think that's where they really faltered and everything. And yeah, it pained me to see just the hateful comments and things about, you know, because it was an all-female cast. But I think you could have had any cast in this movie and it would have suffered just the same. Personally, I think if you put Bill Murray in this cast, and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, with this writing and that editing, you would not have a good movie.
I agree. And to your point, it was saddening to me to see all of these people who, one, hadn't seen the movie, didn't even know hide in their hair about how good the movie was or was not, slamming this movie just because it was an all-female reboot. It is so indicative of the 2018s, or the 2018s. Like, there's more than one of them. There's more than one 2018, folks. It's true. Talk to the Mayans. We're lucky we got here.
According to Stephen Hawking, there could be, you know, thousands of 2018s all running parallel. We just don't know which one we're in.
True. Fair enough. Well, I'm in this one, so I'm good.
Me too.
But in the 2010s, it is so indicative of our time that people will get on the social medias and lament something and find that they have 1,000 people following them, who 100 of them will say, yeah, I agree with that. And they'll share it out to their 1,000 people. And it's just like that old thing about, and they told 2 people, and they told 2 people, and they told 2 people. And suddenly it's made it all the way around the world, and this movie's got backlash for something that it never even did. You don't even know if the movie's good or not. So it goes to this weird fixation with everything has to be the way I remember it. You know what? An all-female reboot of Ghostbusters will not, cannot, unless you figure out how time travel works, ruin your childhood. Because you still have Ghostbusters 1984. It's still the same movie. You can still go back and visit Ray, Egon, and Peter and have a good time, even if the reboot sucks. So I don't know what the deal is with this animosity towards gender-swapped reboots. I just don't get it.
I'm going to do something very uncharacteristic right now, and I'm going to remain silent because otherwise there's not a soapbox in this room big enough for me to stand on.
Are you agreeing or disagreeing?
I'm going to go with him on that.
I'm agreeing, and I will make this as brief as humanly possible, and anybody who knows me will probably be amazed. I will say this.
Sorry.
That the evolution of fandom and the advent of the internet has created a monster that none of us can fully understand or stop as one person.
True.
And that's all I got to say about that.
Again, quotable movies.
Again, I'm with him on this, and there's not a soapbox big enough.
Oh, I agree. You're lucky I cut my diatribe short.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, you know, there's rabbit holes, and they're just going right off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly.
I pretty much said my piece on it. You know, I just, you know, just to kind of add to it. You know, it was, like I said, very disheartening when people said it's like, well, this is a pointless remake. You know, we don't need to do this. This is stupid and everything. It's like, really, like Conan the Barbarian, that was necessary. You know, Point Break, Footloose. You know, nobody complained about those movies. You know, everyone thought, oh, cool, they're making a remake. You know, but. Ghostbusters all female cast, for some reason this was the first seal broken of the apocalypse, you know, for some reason.
And the moon was dark as sackcloth, and
Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
Tell them about the Twinkie.
It's a big Twinkie.
Which, again,
Quotable.
So appropriately quotable.
Actually, and I will go off on a small tangent, and I'm pretty sure that we will touch on this. The hilarity of Ernie Hudson's line, talking to the mayor, "Your Honor, I have seen stuff that would make you turn white," and that would not translate as well today as it did back then.
True. Ernie Hudson's role was actually originally intended for Eddie Murphy.
Why does that not surprise me?
And it was originally intended to be a much larger role. That's one of the things that Ernie Hudson expressed later on, and that's why he has some, I don't want to say animosity, but he looks back with a little bit of regret making this movie, because the script that he was sold on was not the one that he ended up doing, and he took a significant pay cut. He took half of his normal fee to do this movie, thinking that he was going to get a much larger role in it, and when the final version of the script came out, he was introduced halfway through the movie.
But at the same time, though, for me, that movie, I mean, what they did give to Ernie Hudson cemented that character. I could see why they would want Eddie Murphy to play that role, but to me, that will forever be Ernie Hudson. So I can understand his regret about it, but at the same time, though, it was defined him as an actor for me.
He's been in a lot of stuff.
He has, but that is one of the most memorable roles that I can recall of his.
Yeah, let's say he's been in a lot of stuff, but how many people can name anything else other than Ghostbusters off the top of their head?
The Crow.
Oh my God.
Okay, we know you. Okay.
And I see him in all kinds of things. When you see him, you're like, oh my God, it's Ernie Hudson. And I know it's Ernie Hudson because he was Winston Zedmore. So I agree 100%. I see him and think Ghostbusters.
Yeah, he's my childhood's version of, totally butcher his name, Idris Elba.
Oh, I don't know about that.
But no, and the only reason I say this is because my wife is like, oh, it's that guy.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But I gotta say, I think that Ghostbusters would be an entirely different movie without him. Had they actually got Eddie Murphy to play the role, it would be a totally different movie, because Eddie Murphy's a different kind of comedic actor.
Oh, and Eddie Murphy himself would have almost stolen the show there, because that was the height of Eddie Murphy's popularity.
Well, the movie that he actually went to make instead was Beverly Hills Cop.
Right. Oh, valid point.
Yeah, but say Eddie Murphy's personality does not allow much sharing of the spotlight in most of his movies. I mean, it's just it's him. Yeah, he would have stolen the show.
And I think that would not have worked in this movie. Because Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson, Sigourney Weaver, Rick Moranis, none of them had a focus. Janine Potts, or Annie Potts rather. I'm sorry,
Janine.
Yeah. None of them were a singular focus except for when they needed to be. And it was all about the interplay between them. Nobody hogged the show. I mean, you could make an argument that Bill Murray did, but he was kind of the main character in the first place, so he really did have to have a little bit more time spent. But it's indicative of the way they worked together as comedic actors to do a thing, as opposed to, this is going to be about me, or I'm going to steal the show.
Right, because they all had their segments. They all had their scenes that they were key in, and they played off of each other in the scenes where it was the ensemble.
Yes.
And I hate to do this, I'm going to go back to Caddyshack. If you look at the rift between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, there was so much of Caddyshack that was interlaced with all the characters, except Bill Murray's and Chevy Chase's. It was a footnote. You could have Caddyshack the whole movie and not have that scene where Chevy Chase is, practicing in the middle of the night and, runs into, gets into Carl's shed, and it would still be Caddyshack. But as far as Ghostbusters go, you could have that, but it wouldn't have been as funny.
Yeah, everyone interplayed off of everyone well, and they did it incredibly well, and the movie was put together well. So, there.
Agreed.
Yeah. Dan?
Oh, my turn?
Yeah, well, you were looking thoughtful, so yes.
No, I don't know how well this is going to segue into it and everything, because I kind of passed that moment, but I was going to say, it's like the thing that what you had in this movie was a rarity of actual teamwork. I mean, I'm not talking just actors working to make a movie. I'm talking about the portrayal of people who actually acted like a team. I mean, Bill Murray, yeah, he was kind of like there as the main character. He was kind of the front man and everything like that. But I never really got the sense that, he's the one who says, hey, I'm the one in charge here, man. Do what I do. Do what I say. I never got that.
Yeah.
I want to credit that to part of his character also that, it's like, yeah, he kind of wants to be the front man, but he doesn't want any real responsibility. So he always kind of shuffled that off to Igan. It's like, I'll be out here. This is me, guys. But, real responsibility? Egon, you want to take this?
Yeah.
And of course, Egon would share it with Stance, and Zedmore would just be like, what do you want me to do, guys?
Yeah.
I'll do, okay.
Like, I'll believe
just
in
be back
whatever
here.
you want me to, as long as there's a paycheck.
Yeah, and like I say, even back then, that was a rarity in movies. Especially in action movies, you always had the lone wolf that I can do this all on my own. I think because of that teamwork aspect in this movie, I think that's probably, without even really knowing it, I think that's what really led to such an appeal for me.
And I think to slightly build off of that, one of the things that you touched on was Peter being the front man. You can see that when they finally battle Gozer. He doesn't want the responsibility of making the wrong choice, so he just pushes Ray up there, and when are you a god? It's like, no, then die. Which, by the way, made me think of Force Lightning, and made me go look up Return of the Jedi, which came out the year before. So yeah, I'm a nerd. It's okay, but it goes to that whole teamwork concept that you were talking about. Everybody took their turn rather, being in front and doing their thing, and it played to all of their strengths. And then at the end, obviously you got to cross the streams, which involves teamwork and everybody understanding what they need to do. So choose the form.
I was going to say, then the other quotable line from Ernie Hudson: Ray, somebody asks you if you're a god,
you say
yes. And that reminds me, too, it's like, I don't know if you guys remember 2 years later, they had the television cartoon series, The Real Ghostbusters.
Yes.
I loved that.
Oh, I love that show. We talked about it earlier, too, because there was Filmation had their own Ghostbusters show, which was just...
tragic.
Yeah.
That's a word for it.
That's a good word. I had other words for it, but that one's a nice one. I'll go with tragic.
It's a family show, kids.
It only lasted one season. It had some Archie Comics jalopy and a gorilla, and I don't know what they were going with that. So anyways, neither here nor there. But the real Ghostbusters, I always loved how they still played on some of the lines on the movies. And there was actually one episode where the Day's antagonist asked, "Are you a god?" And Zedmore just rushed up to Stance and put his hand over his mouth like, "Don't say it, bro."
Nice.
That's workmanship.
Yeah, well, it's funny, though, that this movie has lived on for so long. I mean, granted, again, we all acknowledge that it's a great comedy, but it spawned that weird offshoot cartoon, a sequel, the Real Ghostbusters television series, and then, 15 to 20 years later, Lego got licenses for Ghostbusters Lego sets. Ghostbusters-themed video games came out. In fact,
Oh, yeah.
I had a Wii... And the difference between the Wii version and the other platforms was you could use the Wii remote as your proton pack wand and, shoot the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and stuff. So, it's amazing how many times people revisit this as a thing like, we should do this. We should do a thing.
Well, and it lends credence to its staying power in that in this world of Hollywood reboots and remakes, that yes, it was deemed worthy by some of the most popular comedic actresses of our time to do a reboot of itself.
Yeah, and to pay homage to
Right.
the original.
Right, touching base, and I always remember this, going to the Charlie's Angels movies, how in... Yes.
Sorry, you didn't hear the eye roll,
No, I
listeners.
didn't.
For those of you that couldn't hear that, there was an eye roll involved there that was actually painful.
But I think it's funny because Drew Barrymore is disguised as LL Cool J, and they're sitting on the airplane before she jumps out, and just, T.J. Hooker, I can't believe they're making another remake. You don't see a remake of T.J. Hooker. You don't see a remake of Kojak. You don't see a remake of a lot of those, those shows. I'm still waiting for the reboot of Hill Street Blues, darn it. And,
Ding, 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 ding. Oh,
I'm
anyway.
still waiting for someone to make their own interpretation and remake Gilligan's Island.
No.
No.
No. No. I'm not saying I wouldn't give it a chance. It would be a really... Yeah, it was called Lost.
No, but it wasn't comedic, so there...
But I would have to give it some serious time before I say, okay, all right, I'll sit down and watch it.
Yeah, this is just as good, if not better, than the original? Nah. No.
No, I don't think I would.
Sometimes you catch lightning in a bottle, and you cannot do it again.
Mm-hmm. Because you're dead. Because you got struck by lightning.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, yeah, this is way off base, but we're talking about remakes and everything. I don't know if you ever saw that little post I made. I really want to see somebody remake The Final Countdown.
No, wrong. That's a song, not the movie.
No, that's the song.
Yeah, that movie kind of hides under the radar. It figuratively, not literally.
Yeah.
That and
another product of the 80s era.
Yeah. Somebody posted a trailer for The Beastmaster, if you remember that movie.
Oh my god.
With Mark Singer and Tanya Roberts.
Yes.
And that movie came out when I was hitting my my
Bong?
No, my maturation
Adolescence
boost, if you will.
Yeah.
I was going through puberty, and I tell you right now, Tanya Roberts, I gotta say, I had a thing.
Wasn't John Stamos? Not John Stamos. Oh god, what's his name? From Good Times.
Sorry,
Hold on,
I was thinking
John
Coming
Amos.
to America. Yeah, John Amos.
Yeah, that was a very uncharacteristic role because I did not know him in anything other than Good Times. And
Wow.
And then to see him in that, it was just kind of like, whoa.
But yes, this and again, it kind of bringing it full circle back around to this movie brings back a lot of nostalgia for the 80s. And one of the things that I had in my notes that I kind of wanted to point out is when they go in and capture Slimer, and then they come out and they transition to that cutscene with all the news magazines and the interview with Larry King and Casey Kasem and the top 40. I think we talked about this during one of our, or actually not one of, our only episode involving Scooby-Doo. Casey Kasem was the voice of Shaggy,
Yes.
and he was actually the voice of many a Navy training video.
Oh, I did not know that.
You weren't paying attention in A school, or they'd gotten rid of him.
I think they got rid of him. Yeah, because
they used to teach him in acoustic or used to show them in acoustic analysis courses. Yeah, he was a lieutenant commander in the United States Naval Reserve.
I would have loved to have analyzed his voice.
But Larry King, this was the first time he'd ever been shown in a movie, so that was again the 80s. That was when Larry King started. So, but the other aspect was they showed Time magazine, still with us, Newsweek with us, the New York Post, still with us, and the magazine that I remember from the 80s as a child reading on again, off again when I could afford it with my meager allowance was Omni magazine. And that was actually, if I recall correctly, put out by the same company that published Penthouse magazine, and Omni magazine disappeared for a good long time. When the internet came out, they moved to a digital-only medium, and then after a while, they just went away. But ironically, last year, Omni magazine back in print. And they were not really well respected as a science magazine.
Yeah, but to say, weren't they the National Enquirer of science
oh, yeah,
magazine?
Yeah, and that's why I read them, because it was like, all this weird sciencey, theory, parapsychology stuff. It was just fun to read, and I'm 14. What do I know from real? I didn't have the internet to fact check things, and not for nothing, I would say that 99% of the people on the internet don't fact check crap anyway. So it wouldn't matter anyway. But it tickled me to see that when I just kind of Googled Omni magazine to see whatever happened to it, and only to find out that it's back in print.
I bet there's a subreddit for that.
I'm sure that there's a subreddit for everything. Dan, did you ever read Omni magazine?
I used to peruse it. Never bought a copy, but when my mom was shopping, at the market, and I'd go to the magazine section, and I'd look at Mad Magazine, I'd look at something else or whatever, and look at Omni if a cover had something interesting, and I'd look in there. Again, looking for ghost stories, which they had.
Yeah, they were well known for covering parapsychological phenomena. Phenomena. Sorry.
Oh my God! What is he?
Phenomena. Listeners, if you want to deprogram, just give it about 5 minutes or so. Maybe go to Disney World, listen to It's a Small World. But again, that just made me happy. And one of the things about Omni magazine that separated it from a lot of other magazines of the day was they used a thicker, heavier paper. Like Newsweek was like a heavier newsprint almost. So not that I was reading a lot of Newsweek, but we did have to do current events in high school. So, I did cut out some Newsweek magazine stuff. Never really used an Omni though. Anyway, it made me look back on the 80s with a good nostalgic sense. It was just, it was like a happy visit. Memories. Like the corner of my mind.
God, you just reminded me. There was a show in the 80s that used that as their opening theme song. And what was it? It was a show about Hollywood movies, and they always talked about remembering old movies and everything. And it was the Barbra Streisand rendition of that song was the opening theme. Just touching on memories. And again, trying to stick with not going down too deep a rabbit hole and everything. But you remember the scene where the Ghostbusters had their commercial and Dana's seeing on TV, and for a split second, and you hear their line, "We're ready to believe you." A phone number flashed on that. Mm-hmm. Any of you try calling that?
No.
Nope.
I didn't get to use the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was information, basically.
For New York City? Nice.
I forgot, today, this, the first three numbers I forgot, but the last two were 1212, and those were indicative of, back in the day, those were indicative of information.
It was 555, by the way.
Was it 555? Okay. 555-1212.
A lot of times in movies, it's 555.
Yeah, so there you go. So, it was an information number. So, just thought I'd bring that up.
No.
Stand by.
Wait for it.
Is he looking for it?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Actually, the Ghostbusters had a real 1-800 number. During the film's original theatrical release, the director set up a 1-800 number. It was 1-800-555, blah, 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 blah. The same numbers in the movie, and it was a recording of Ray and Peter on the other end.
I never got that.
Maybe you were dialing locally?
Yeah, probably.
I just remember the last 7. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. What do I know from 1-800 numbers? What do I know about toll-free?
Yeah, New York got all the good stuff.
You could dial a 1-800 number from anywhere in the country.
I'm just saying, I never got no recording. I thought that would have been the coolest thing in the world. Stuff, again, technology stuff like that we take for granted, little viral campaigns and things. You look at The Dark Knight, that stuff was surrounded with viral more than I could ever go to and look at. I mean, you got some really dedicated people looking at all this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Deadpool had some good viral marketing, too.
Oh, yeah. So, for me, in the 80s, if something like that were to exist and I discovered that, oh my God, I probably would have been like the coolest kid among the nerdy kids.
Speaking of nerdy moments, did you notice in Ghostbusters when they were in jail that Carl Winslow was the one that told them that the mayor wanted to see them? Or Sergeant Al Powell, you take your pick.
Yes.
I did not notice that until you brought that up in an earlier discussion. I guess I have to go look back and say, yeah, I guess he was right.
Well, you don't have to look back and guess that I was right. You know that I was right.
Your humility is overwhelming.
Was, Rick Moranis' girlfriend in the party.
Yes. I cannot remember her name, but
I
remember her from Cheers, and then the spin-off series, The Ferrantellis.
The Fratellis.
Or The Fratellis. There we go.
The Fratellis.
Yep. What the heck was her character's name? It was something that he always kept saying. Damn it. It started with an L. Oh, well. It's not important.
Not librarian.
No, it was not librarian.
Just looking at
a dictionary.
Yeah, let's just start going through L words. Lascivious, no. Larry King, we've already talked about him. She was not him.
No.
But so
she's just listed as tall woman at party.
Oh,
Jean Kasem.
Yep. Okay.
That's it.
I wonder if she got that because... No, she was an actress in her own right, so I don't think she had to leverage the Casey Kasem thing. But maybe she was the one that was able to get Casey Kasem's top 40 voiceover in the movie.
Or maybe it was a stipulation, put her in the movie if he's going to do the voice.
Yeah, but true. But that's also, again, good product placement in the way that slams you in the face. And one of the other things that made me stop and chuckle in the middle of this movie is in regards to product placement is when Peter is at Dana's apartment and he opens up the fridge and they're staring him in the face with the logo facing out so that you might read it appropriately. Coca-Cola with a swoosh. And that's fine. I get it. Sometimes a Coke lands in the fridge and it happens to be logo out.
It's the most popular soft drink in the world.
But when they shift camera angles and they're looking towards the six-pack Perrier, which apparently didn't get as good product placement, but whatever, there's another can of Coke, which conveniently enough is facing you with not the Coca-Cola in script with the little swooshy logo thing, but the Coke in big letters on the back. So it's not an accident, and it's one of those like, well, that's
So what you're saying
awkward.
is that can was in its own right a spectral entity that was not paid enough attention to.
No, I paid attention to it. Like Coke, got it. Product placement. So I'm kind of aware of that sometimes. I get it. In life you see things everywhere, ads for stuff all over the place, and when they put it in movies, it's fairly natural. But there are some times when it like pokes you in the eye and says, "Oh, I should drink some Coke," and it's kind of in your face.
It's just really sad when people just put advertisements in movies just to
going
make
there.
money.
I was so gonna go there.
But I took a marketing class in the mid-2000s, and the instructor was actually a marketing executive who had handled contracts for, if you're familiar with the company Merry Maids.
Yes.
Familiar.
Yeah, he actually got them into a couple of movies. It's like, yeah, if you recall in X and So movie, I was the one that got the contract for that to put Merry Maids in there
That's
when they show up. Like, oh, all right, cool. So, he was a legit, actually did something person teaching the class. So, for some reason, that sort of thing always sticks in my mind.
little, yellow, different. That always sticks in my mind.
And I also, in the early 80s, read Subliminal Seduction, which has kind of been debunked as garbage now, but it's a neat book, and it was a lot of fun. Do you remember that? It was big in the 80s.
Oh yeah, I remember that, and it's like it became kind of a scavenger hunt then when we heard. Obviously, I didn't read the entire book at that age, but you got the gist of it, and it became a scavenger hunt, looking at all the advertisements, looking for little hidden pictures. Especially being the adolescent that I was, you're looking for
because
the hidden
most
naked
of them
ladies.
were, ooh, hey. Well, again, it goes back to flipping that channel and sitting there with the thing on the side, like, oh God, I know what that is. So one of the things we have not touched on yet on this movie is Walter Peck.
I'd rather not touch that.
No, fair enough.
And why
I didn't say
and why the EPA was so interested in what the Ghostbusters were doing.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I appreciate the EPA for what it does, but I didn't appreciate the villainization of the EPA. But William Atherton, the actor that played Walter Peck, credits Ghostbusters with more or less ruining his career in the same way that Bruce Dern credits The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance with ruining his career for a good long time.
Oh, you mean as far as generally typecasting a person?
No. Bruce Dern, going to that, in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and mild spoiler for a 60, maybe 70-year-old movie. I don't remember when that came out. Bruce Dern shoots John Wayne. And for the longest time, he could not get cast in movies because he wasn't Bruce Dern. He was the guy that shot John Wayne. Yeah. William Atherton was the dickless dude that shut off the containment unit in Ghostbusters, and he would get harassed on the street for playing a character in a movie.
And, okay, not going back to my whole, the advent of the internet and fandom, he usually had an antagonist role. Real genius.
Die Hard.
Die Hard.
Die Hard 2.
Die Hard.
Die Hard 2. I mean, Die Hard 2 is more of a continuation of a typecasting. You know, okay, then I can lend credence to that. You know, that he can.
Yeah.
He can say that.
So yeah, Real Genius came out in 1985, and that does lend credence to what you were talking about, the typecasting. So, kind of got most of what I wanted to talk about. Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, just kind of one more thing that, didn't know a proper place to segue into it, but good a time as any. It's like the thing about this movie taking us back to the 80s and everything. We've talked about this in previous podcasts. Music is just one of those things that is probably one of the more powerful elements of any film that really takes you back. I don't know that Ghostbusters, I mean, aside from the Ray Parker Jr. theme song that people remember, but I don't know if people really qualify this soundtrack as something that takes them back, but I don't know. I guess I'm in the minority on that, especially, again, forgive me, I don't know the name of the song, but the song when they get the National Guard together, and it was that really like bum bum, ba-dum bum bum, that.
Oh yeah,
that song.
Yeah.
Gets me, about gonna save the world and everything. The song
Saving
Magic.
the Day.
Yeah, Saving the Day. Yeah.
Saving the Day. And the song Magic, which was playing when the containment unit was done. I mean, I still have those on my iPod. I listen to them regularly.
Really?
Yeah, especially that Magic one.
Okay.
Wasn't Somebody's Watching Me? Wasn't that also a part of the Ghostbusters soundtrack? I always feel
I
don't
think so.
I think they came out about the same time, though.
Same time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They could just be guilt by association.
Right. Not a bad thing on that.
Oh no. But the thing I laugh about the most about this too is that I remember back in '84 when it's like you hear that music and you're just like, wow, who is that? What song is that? And of course, even if you went to the record store and looked at the soundtrack, you weren't sure exactly which one of those songs was it. You had to buy the whole thing and play each track individually, and because a cassette tape, you had to fast forward it,
Well, you didn't really have to, because all you had to do was wait for it to come out on Casey Kasem's American Top 40 and hit record.
Oh, wow, okay.
And pray to God that Casey would shut up before the song started.
Oh no, Casey, nothing. You hope that either my sister or my mom wouldn't say anything while I was holding the tape recorder up to the stereo, and it's like, oh, I'm getting the song, and you're like, Daniel! It's like, oh!
Ruined!
You always do this to me, I hate you! But, Justin, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, other than, this is one of my more, quotable movies. There's so much we could actually talk about. I really can't even touch on anything without going off into a tangent, so I'll refrain.
Okay. All right. So, Dan, where does this go on your shelf?
Well, for the time being, it is general population.
Of course it is.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I don't. Limited shelf space. Because you gotta share the apartment with the family. So until I can expand my shelf and everything, and actually have a section of comedies that I can watch over and over again.
Okay.
It will eventually join the ranks of Airplane, Blazing Saddles, Monty Python, The Holy Grail. Comedies that are funny over and over again, no matter how many times I watch them.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a comedy that you can watch back to back and still laugh each time, because it's one of those movies that you find yourself saying the lines along with the characters. And that, for me, makes this a top shelf comedy. I think in an overall movie sense, I would probably put it on the second shelf, but I will say it is in the top 10 of my most favorite comedies of all time. So, Justin, you're familiar with where it goes on your shelf. I know you don't own it, but if you did, where would you put it on your shelf?
I was just thinking of that myself. My library system is not as OCD as yours. And listening to the podcast, I kind of think I'm along the same lines as Dan, although my shelves are split between a couple locations. However, this movie is general population, but in a regularly visited area of the general population.
Cool. All right.
Nice.
With that, let's push the random magic movie button.
Howard the Duck.
Yes! I've so been waiting for this movie. Howard the Duck.
It's a family show. I can't say it.
Satan, you owe me one.
Well, you're not going to be here for it, Justin.
I
so
know, and that
it'll be okay.
I wish I could be, but I appreciate you guys. You know, Loki. I appreciate you guys having me on. This has been a real treat. We could go on forever, and I'm glad we didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so listeners, if you spoilers for our next episode, how I feel about this movie. So next episode we'll be talking about Howard the Duck. If you would like to leave feedback about this or any other episode, please visit our Facebook page. Email us at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. Leave some feedback on the Twitters. And also, again, just to reiterate, please send us your suggestions so that when we do our 5 and 0 episodes, we can include your picks. And with that, as Dan has already deferred to you, is there a movie-themed goodbye that you would like to say for this episode?
Let's show this prehistoric how we do things downtown.
All right, listeners, we will see you in 2 weeks with Howard the Duck. Yes!